First Christian Church in Frankfort has had a long association with Lexington Theological Seminary. For years and years, we had student ministers coming and being part of our community, being trained by you to be ministers in the Christian Church, disciples of Christ. That practice has changed because the nature of seminary education has changed as well. But our relationship continues. Don and Lillian Nunley have the endowed chair of preaching in their name and is continuing that ministry into the future. I have had the good fortune to teach a couple of worship classes and look forward to the next time we are offering a music course. So our relationship with Lexington Theological Seminary, although it is not what it was historically, is what it is today because of the context of theological education. This morning we have Mark Blankenship with us from Lexington. He is the Vice President for Advancement. I am glad he's not the Vice President for Retreat. They're never good when you have to explain them. Mark wants to bring greetings to us this morning from Lexington and thank us for our continuing participation in the life of the seminary. Mark, would you come and speak to us?
Thanks. Thank you. President Charisse Gillette asked me to come and give you all thanks for the continued offerings that you give the seminary. That thanks goes beyond just the monetary gifts that this congregation brings. For in our new shape and form, the Board of Trustees, the faculty, the LTS community realize that the single partnership is with the congregation. For without the congregation, there is no reason for Lexington Theological Seminary. And so we have continued to strengthen and redouble our effort, to advance our effort to support the congregation. Training for those who would seek a Master's of Divinity degree, those who seek to lead through a Certificate of Pastoral Studies, those who would be interested in advancing their understanding theologically through a Master's of Theological Studies. But also through our lay school and our webinars, we are seeking to provide the congregation and its ordained and lay leaders with an opportunity that will help them expand and strengthen and lead God's realm in our world. We are grateful for your monetary support, but we are also grateful for your prayers and your continued encouragement. I would leave you with this one thought, that as you observe those in your midst, in this congregation, in this community, who you recognize have a passion for the church, the passion for creating God's kingdom in our world, that they might be one who you would suggest consider a theological education. That may be as simple as attending a lay school. It may also be more relevant to a Master's of Divinity degree. And of course, there are all of us who can lead by our example in support of theological education with our gifts, our tithes, our support of the congregation, our support of the denomination through the Disciples Mission Fund, and of course, the support of the seminary through your offerings to us as well. We give thanks for the blessing of First Christian Church Frankfort and their continued partnership and their love of God through their support of us. Thank you all very much.
Our reading from the Gospel this morning is from the Gospel of John, chapter 15, verses 9 through 17. We continue from where we left off last Sunday. Jesus is speaking. As the Father loved me, I too have loved you. Remain in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will remain in my love, just as I kept my Father's commandments and remain in his love. I've said these things to you so that my joy will be in you and your joy will be complete. This is my commandment: love each other just as I have loved you. No one has greater love than to give up one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. I don't call you servants any longer, because servants don't know what their master is doing. Instead, I call you friends, because everything I heard from my Father, I have made known to you. You didn't choose me. I chose you and appointed you so that you could go and produce fruit, and so that your fruit could last. As a result, whatever you asked the Father in my name, he will give you. I give you these commandments so that you can love each other. I'm not certain when it was in the course of human development that we determined that the heart was the location of love. Why not the kidneys? Why not the spleen? Why the heart? Somehow, we settled on the heart. Perhaps there was a time in our development when we actually believed that the heart was the source of love. Today, I think we know better, yet we still think of the heart when we think of love. I've been thinking a lot about the heart this week. On Wednesday, I had a surgical procedure known as an ablation performed on my heart. I wasn't nervous about it. I trusted my surgeon. His expertise was this very procedure. He has done nearly 2,000 of them in his still young career. The purpose of having the procedure was to hopefully bring my heart into proper rhythm, ending a 12 or 13-year struggle with atrial fibrillation. Still, and I know the thought was totally ridiculous, still the idea of having someone working inside my heart with a laser gave me pause to wonder if such manipulation might change the way I feel about you, the way I love my wife, the way I love my family. Jesus is spending his last full day with his disciples. He has washed their feet. They have shared the Passover meal, and now he is sharing his final thoughts with his closest friends. Friends, I feel certain that he has come to love. It didn't take much divine intuition to know that he was soon to be killed. He surely recognized the hate and violence the religious leaders had in their hearts. How could he not? So Jesus delivers what we describe as his farewell address. I'm not a fan of the language. Farewell is okay, but address makes it sound like some kind of speech or lecture. This was neither one of those. This was table talk, a sharing of love, of the things Jesus wanted his friends to know and to take into their own hearts. He was, if you'll forgive me, speaking from his heart. I have only one close friend from my high school days who has died. There have been others, of course, in my class, but only one who was close. Freddie Manfred and I and a couple of others were best buds. We played sports together. We spent time in each other's homes. We shared dreams and talked about high school sweethearts. But Fred never really got to live out his dreams. For nearly 30 years, he lived with dialysis 3 times a week, every week. But he didn't give up on life. He continued to do the things he wanted, but it became ever more difficult. One of the last times I saw him, I went up to visit him in his apartment. It was a small place in a Section 8 housing apartment. He couldn't get out of bed. But we visited for an hour or more, recalling escapades, victories, a few losses as well, the rolling of a milk truck. Oh, yeah. As I was turning the handle on the door to leave, Fred said, "I love you, Uppy." Uppy was my high school nickname. I cried all the way down the elevator. It was the first and only time that one of those really great friends had ever said that to me, and I had never said it to any of them. And although it caught in my throat, I said, "I love you, Fred," as the door closed. Jesus said, "As the Father loved me, I too have loved you." Don't you imagine the disciples were a bit uncomfortable? Men don't talk about love with each other, and barely with the ones we love. Jesus had washed their feet, something as startling as anyone could imagine. That is, until he started talking about love. But for all the fidgeting and the collar loosening, Jesus didn't stop there talking about love. Jesus never stops when we want him to. He never stops until there's nothing left to say. Love each other just as I have loved you. Did he really mean love John and James, who determined that the two of them should be the greatest of all of Jesus' followers, sitting one on his right and one on his left in the thrones of glory? Love Peter, who spoke too often, usually putting his foot in his mouth. Love Judas, who was about to betray Jesus. Love each other. Jesus said, "Everything that I have said, everything that I have done has been so that you might love one another." Of all the things Jesus might have talked about, he chose to talk about loving God and loving one another. Don't you think he should have been talking about who was to be his heir, the new leader of the movement that he had begun? Don't you think he should have spent some time talking about how to organize the church? It certainly would have helped the church. But those are head conversations, and Jesus wanted to talk about the heart. Atrial fibrillation is an irregular and often rapid heart rate that can increase the risk of stroke, heart failure, and other heart-related complications. During atrial fibrillation, the heart's 2 upper chambers beat chaotically and irregularly, out of coordination with the 2 lower chambers of the heart. AFib symptoms sometimes include heart palpitations, shortness of breath, and weakness. Episodes may come and go, and one may develop AFib that never goes away and thus requires treatment. Although it's not life-threatening, it is a serious medical condition, and I needed treatment. It may lead to complications. AFib can lead to blood clots forming in the heart that may circulate to other organs and lead to blocked off blood flow. I feel good this morning. My brain's a little fuzzy, but you all know that. Too often, I think we are cavalier about how our hearts are working, our spiritual hearts. Too often, we don't care that we are out of rhythm. We don't care that when we try to love God on the one hand and love accumulations on the other, that our hearts are out of rhythm. We don't care that when we try to love some and hold contempt and animosity for others, that our hearts are out of rhythm. Still, when Jesus was making his final appeal to his disciples, it was an appeal to the heart, an appeal to love, to care about how we treat one another, how we relate to one another, how we interact with one another. It was an appeal to be in sync with God, in sync with one another. He knew that when our hearts are out of rhythm, that we are weakened, the church is weakened. He knew that when our hearts are not working properly, we are easily fatigued in doing the ministry and easily confused by the noise that surrounds us. He knew that when our hearts were not working properly, that we had shortness of breath and couldn't sustain our lives of faith. Jesus knew that there is nothing more important than love. When disciple ministers get together or get online in online groups, it is common. It's so common, it's comical, that we say, if we don't know how to end a sermon, we tell a Fred Craddock story. Fred Craddock was a renowned disciple preacher and a teacher of preachers. Like Jesus, he was a wonderful storyteller. And this morning I end with one of his stories, and I am quoting him. A few years ago in a church in Oklahoma where I was worshiping with my family, I had an afternoon engagement and had to leave quickly. I said goodbye to them after the benediction. In order to get to the parking lot quickly, I cut back through the choir room. I said to one of the women in the choir as she was putting away her robe, "I appreciate very much the anthem you sang this morning. Thank you." She said, "I hope so, because that's it." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "That's it, I'm hanging it up." She was putting away her choir robe. I said, "Are you retiring?" She'd been in the choir for 103 or 104 years, so I thought she was retiring. She said, "No, I'm quitting." I said, "You're quitting?" She said, "I'm quitting." "You're not quitting." "I'm quitting." "Well, why are you quitting?" She said, "I sat up there in the choir loft this morning and looked around at the other choir members. And I looked at the minister, and I looked at the worship leader, and I looked out over the congregation, and I said finally to myself what has haunted me for years, I said, "What's that?" She said, "Who cares?" Well, I was in a hurry. I had to make a speech, so I said, "Oh, you'll be all right. Take an aspirin. All you have is a headache. I'll call you in the morning." I went out to the parking lot, but all the way to my engagement and all the way back, I thought about the indictment. I was a member of that church at that time, and she was indicting me and all the members. In fact, if it were true what she had said, then it wasn't a church at all. If her opinion, after long-time membership there as an active participant in the choir, was that the sum gesture of that church was a shrug of the shoulders, then it was not a church. When I got home that afternoon, I called the lady. I said, "I would like to talk to you." She said, "If you want to." I said, "I want to." I went over there. We talked, and brusquely, we disagreed. I finally asked her, "Well, what would we have to do to show you that we care?" And this is what she said: "Take me seriously." I was dumbfounded. It was a strange way to put it, especially for her. She was kind of a comic, a sort of stick of peppermint. She was always playing practical jokes. She would pin the tails of choir robes together. She would come to church early and put some big cartoon on the pulpit, so when the minister came out in all his sobriety, he'd look down and be blown out of the water. She was that kind of person. So I said, "You can't be serious." "Take you seriously? What are you talking about? You're always joking and laughing." And she said, "You bought all that?" I thought I was rather transparent myself. I like to be taken seriously. When I left that lady's house, I said to her, "You're wrong. You're wrong." She said, "I'm not." I said, "I get to travel to churches all over the country, and everywhere I go, there are people who care for each other. They take care of one another. They love one another." She said, "Where?" I said, "Everywhere I go, there are people who care." She said, "Really?" "Yes." She said, "Name some." She wants names. May I use your name? May I give her your name?